Hey guys, it's Monday morning. This is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, and I'm gonna try and make a video while I'm preparing my breakfast, which is a bit of an experiment. And today I wanted to talk about how we can use our emotions as a navigation system, and how necessary they are because I had an experience yesterday in which um, emotion and rationality kind of collided, if you will, right? So there was a conversation in which I felt fairly kind of unpleasant emotions inside me, even though on the face of it, what the other person was saying was rationally correct. And I thought to myself, well, this is an interesting situation because how can it be that on the face of it, what's being said is um, it's correct, but it's making me feel ugly inside. Why is that? Now, in this specific case, we were talking about I don't know. I think it was around slavery and slave ownership and those kind of things, and and so while we were talking about it, my friend was having a go at slave owners and saying how you know they had done these horrific things and it just infuriated him and these kind of things, right? Like he was really feeling disgusted about what slave owners had done, and I said, well, you have to understand that was poorly phrased, by the way, admittedly, but I said, oh, you have to understand that the slave owner is also a victim, and I didn't mean it in the sense of saying that that they are suffering equally, because that's obviously not the case. But what I meant to say is that the level of consciousness or the mentality that makes you act like a cruel slave owner means that you're really operating on a super low level, and that to the degree that you are willing or blind to inflicting pain on other people is very often the case that you have been at the receiving end of something similar. I mean, it is a well-known phenomenon in psychology that abusers have been abused themselves in the past. That's not a new thing. So even though during the cruel act there is a perpetrator and a victim, to then feel quote unquote disgusted by the perpetrator, excuse me, is to me just observing things in a very narrow moment in which all you are observing is the act, but you are assuming a number of things that I think are incorrect. First of all is the assumption that a cruel act exists in isolation, which is not the case. I think that there's a certain momentum that is carried, which results in a cruel act being committed, and also that the person committing the cruel act has free will, or rather that they are making a conscious choice. I believe it was what we discussed yesterday with my friend, that they have a conscious choice in what they're doing, and I don't think that's quite correct. I think that you only have conscious choice when you have awoken to your conscious awareness. So when you become self-realized or self-aware, you have then some leeway in directing the system left or right. I think any time before that, your system is essentially acting on autopilot. Now, that is not to say that the system should not be held responsible for what it's done, because well, we need that for society to operate. However, the place from which you do it dictates whether you have a sort of punishment type of prison system, or a system in which you take a system that has clearly gone off the rails and you go, okay, let's manage the system so that it finds its flow again. Because a system that a person / mind-body system that commits cruelty is clearly not in flow, right? So from a place of flow, from a high state of consciousness, openness, creativity, connectivity, you are not blind to the effect of your cruel acts, and you don't feel like committing them, right? So this is a system that is not in the place it should be. Therefore, it suffers, and it thinks that it can almost sort of outsource its suffering out there, and will stop at nothing to try to regain its composure by making others suffer. And of course, that doesn't work. It just makes it worse. But you know, every system operates to try and maximize its own well-being and minimize its own suffering. All right. So when slave traders were doing these things, they were trying to better their lives, so to speak, misguided as the attempt was. That was my take on it. But what made the conversation very interesting was that we agreed on the fact that the act was wrong, but what we did not agree on was on what our framing should be of the topic. And my framing, or I was advocating for a framing that was, on the face of it, more lenient towards the perpetrators. But what I was really trying to do was to say, I'm not going to harbor disgust or righteous indignation against another. Not because their acts were not despicable, but because that's simply an emotion that I just don't want in me. It feels ugly, right? And so think for a moment about this, because you know, he and I are you know, we can speak on very interesting terms about these things. We really want to understand them, right? So he was like, oh, I'm disgusted about what these people did and whatever. And my thought was, I don't want disgust in me. I just don't want it, right? So to join someone in a cause against the evil other is super seductive. And also to embody righteous indignation, it makes us feel really kind of good about ourselves. Like, oh, I feel disgust because this is wrong, and these people and those people, whatever. But righteous indignation is one of the primary disguises of the ego, right? So it is, you know, why are you not feeling disgusted about this? It is a disgusting act. You should feel disgusted. Now, it's an evil act. It's horrible, but I don't want disgust in me. I just don't want it, right? So I draw a line and I say, well, so how is it that I can manage to observe a disgusting act and not feel disgust in me towards the person? And I think that the way to do that is to realize that the place from which they are committing that act is you know, they can't be in a good place. At the very least, they are blind, right? And they're probably just transferring suffering themselves. So you if you look at a frame in a movie, you go, oh my God, that's the bad guy. This is evil. If you extend your view of the movie far enough, you go, now I understand. And so some gurus have even said that to understand everything is to forgive everything, because inevitably there comes a point where a cause is created, or suffering inflicted, or a blind spot exists in this mind-body system that we call the evil person, which ends up in the evil deed being expressed. But the expression of that evil deed is, to my mind, it's just unconscious. I don't think there's, you know, even if there is conscious thought in the process, there is a subconscious motive driving it that is outside of the person's bandwidth, if you will, or it's a complete blind spot, of course, right? And so that, to me, that view doesn't preclude me from taking action to stop an evil act being committed. I mean, if anything, one of the things that I can't stand is a weak person or a weak animal being abused. I mean, that to me is just, it is the one instance where in that moment I actually do become violent because I can't stand it. And my friend has the same. It comes from the right place, in other words. I know that. And I have the same, because I have the same. But it is one thing to counteract the act in an effective way in that moment. And it is another one to brew over it and engage in righteous indignation, because that is an anchoring for your ego. It finds a place where you can identify with and play the role of the person who feels that way. And it's an ugly emotion, but it also anchors the ego. You see, the ego is looking for ways to remain anchored in you. And it'll try anything, right? So it'll be, the persona of the good parent, right? Or the persona of the hard worker, or the charity doer. Those are good things, by the way. It can also be like, oh, I'm the loser, right? So it'll find anything to compare itself against another, so to speak. So it needs another in order to exist. And so an emotion like righteous indignation is very seductive because it makes you feel like a good person. In other words, it could be coming from the right place. But to engage in it, you need to create another against which you are indignated or disgusted. And so now you've created that separation. And that's how causes are created, right? Like, oh, you join a cause. And a cause needs an enemy, or it needs another. And my understanding of these things is becoming more and more subtle. And it is becoming clear that when you join a cause with an enemy, that cause, as good as it appears on the surface, already has within it the seed of conflict, actually, because you've created something that you call another, against which you are going to act. And whereas if you take experiments that they have run in the prison system, where the inmate is not seen as an evil person, but as a system that is out of whack and that needs help, now you get into a real transformation. There's no resistance in you towards this, and you can try and transform it. Would I be thinking so lightly about it if I had been I have been in the past the subject of emotional or even physical violence, right? And the question is, would I be so lenient about it if something really horrific had happened to me? It's a pretty tall order, isn't it? There's stories about Buddhist monks who got tortured, and when interviewed, they expressed that their biggest fear while this was happening was to develop hatred towards the perpetrator. I mean, that it means full commitment to viewing things from a place of harmony. Because the moment hate is born within you, then the hate that lives in the perpetrator has truly won. And you can't let that happen. That is where it stops for me. The buck stops with me in how I view ugly acts towards me. I need to understand them correctly for what they are. Not just on the surface of, oh, this is disgusting. No. Our job is to go further than that, deeper than that, to really understand. Not to be lured by the seductive thing of like, oh, now I'm going to show I'm angry. And it's like, that's easy. Being angry and disgusted and righteously indignated against something, it's low-hanging fruit. It's the cheap and easy reaction to something. You don't want that. Even if you're correct, logically speaking, or morally speaking, you're expressing yourself correctly. In the words of my old motorcycle teacher, there's no point in being right if you're dead right. Yeah? So even if you are logically correct, you still want to adopt a frame that is inclusive and harmonious because it does something to you from the inside. So that the point of this entire video is, I'm trying to reconcile what happened in that conversation, and I must say that you can't bring naked spiritual truths, if you will, or angles to bear on a practical situation without making it seem, at least on the surface, that you are being dismissive of what that practical situation means. It is a disgusting situation. There's no doubt about that. right? But the question is, are you disgusted then with the person, and are you making them another? Are you creating a separation between you and them, or are you willing to expand your view? I mean, we've talked in previous videos about the effects of expanding your gaze to see the full periphery of your field of vision. It's the same thing. So you can, when you are looking at things in a very nitty-gritty, narrow way, you're closing in, your mind sort of closes around a certain object. And when you expand your field of vision, your mind is just, it's seeing the full periphery, and it's seeing this, it's seeing the full system, so to speak, right? So when you see things in terms of the full system, your answers are far more powerful, because they take, your subconscious takes the entire picture into consideration and acts from that wider perspective. And the wider perspective is always love. The wider perspective, if it's drawn wide enough, it never contains resistance or hatred or the feelings of disgust, which are our body clenching and going, "Ugh, I feel disgusted about this." That's reaction, right? But our true intelligent response is wide and open. And so that's my take on it, is that you can observe things factually for what they are. You can dislike actions. You can heavily dislike actions or be like totally appalled by them, right? But to start to create an enemy in your mind is counterproductive, is unnecessary, and I think it also detracts from the kind of responses or from the kind of action that you are likely to take. Look, for example, at initiatives like the war on drugs, for example. Where did that take us? It took us to a huge black market where billions or trillions are moved around in cash, where politicians are bought and sold, where neighborhoods and entire countries are sunk in violence, and where the demand side of the coin is full of ugly addictions and people doing things in secret and being forced to self-medicate with illegal stuff just to dampen their own anxieties and things. It's a completely dysfunctional view of the situation, just because somebody said drugs are bad, right? It's evil. Whereas, no, it's not evil. It's simply dysfunctional. There's a difference between those two, because a dysfunction can be correctly seen and addressed from the right point of view. Evil can't be correctly seen or addressed. Evil needs to be attacked, right? And so if we make an intelligent distinction between those two things, I think that it feels a lot better, certainly. And from that better, more open, loving feeling, our response can be very, very effective. And so yeah, that's the main message, right? And I would say use emotions as your guiding. It's like a compass to observe in yourself whether you are seeing things correctly, whether you are seeing things for what they are. Are you getting caught in cheap, righteous emotion, or are you getting caught in overanalyzing or overly, what would you call it, conceptualize or intellectualize things? Check the emotional guiding system, right? Does it feel harmonious? Does it give energy, or does it suck the energy out of the room? If you're sucking the energy out of the room, even if you are technically correct, there's something's off. Something is off with your thing. I've noticed it in myself as well. For example, I was talking about art with my neighbors the other day, and they were talking about this little art show where these amateurs go and paint celebrities and stuff like that. And I went on a rant about how I thought that the art that we're making was really crappy and da-da-da. And then I noticed that what I was really upset about was the fact that I put a lot of energy in my art, and I never became famous. To put it quite black and white, right? Like it never drew the attention of media or whatever. Even though I thought it is, I still think it's superior technically, at least, to some of the things that these people are making. And I felt hurt and indignated by that. So what I did was I looked at the cheap shot of saying, yeah, but you know, it's a crappy, and I went on this entire rant about it, and then you notice that the energy is sucked out of the room. You can't, watch out for that. Watch out for, are what you're doing and saying bringing energy into the room and within yourself, or is it becoming heavy? Is it becoming stale? You go, ooh, that's, yeah, he's right. Yeah, he's right. You know, they're right. She's right. But the energy is gone.